Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my video on Game Week 4. I feel like this is a week after the international break where I've had a lot of time to sit and think about my team, what my transfer plans are going forwards. I made a video on my transfer plans. I'm very likely going to roll in Game Week 4, but I think that for a lot of managers, you need to think about what the decisions are over this week and next week, because it has implications on when you're going to wildcard and maybe if you have some flexibility around the wildcard as well. For my own team, I'll be discussing how the different wildcard strategies that I've been thinking of over the international break have an impact on my transfer plans for Game Week 5 and what I've been thinking about there. As far as Game Week 3, we're going to preview or rather review that. But before we jump into that, I'd like to shout out Fantasy Football Hub. They're a fantastic tool to help increase your rank as an FPL manager. I've been using Fantasy Football Hub myself to help get a fantastic finish over the last 2 seasons. And ultimately, a lot of these sort of decisions that we come to are supported by some of the data that they have, some of the advanced data that they have through OptaStats, the expected points projections that they have, and also some of the other tools that they have that will help increase your rank and also help you win your mini league. There's a 50% off offer up until the end of this month, so do make use of it if you'd like to. Otherwise, let's just jump into Game Week 4 and my team selection. So with Game Week 3, I think I had a very strong week. This time I got 89 points without a triple captaincy, so that felt good. And part of that was just simply not doing much to my team. Getting rid of Nkunku in Game Week 2 after that deadline helped me to effectively sort of steady my cash flow. Look, Nkunku's dropped a lot in price. Kwanzaa's dropped a lot in price. So we did make some mistakes on the Game Week 1 team, but it's nice that we've sort of navigated out of that with players who've gotten price rises since. And Lewis finally returned in Game Week 3, which was really nice. Henderson also outscored Flecken finally, which was nice too. I do think that goalkeepers tend to be a position where I don't really like forcing a transfer unless I really feel like I've completely messed up the decision on the goalkeeper. I find myself only really considering a goalkeeper transfer during a wild card. So once again, staying committed to Henderson for now, and he has got Leicester at home, whereas I think a lot of people might have jumped the gun on potentially selling him. Ultimately, with Guehi staying, with Chalobah joining the team, you can argue that Crystal Palace's defense look pretty much as good as last season, if not better, given the depth that they have. As far as Konsa and Trent, Trent continues to look really good. We had a disallowed goal there as well, which was super unfortunate, but happy still with Trent and his performances so far. Those early subs are something that I don't love, but there's a balance, right? Because with defenders, oddly in FPL, you do kind of like them being early subbed because that always means you can probably have a pretty high chance of securing a clean sheet. But at the same time, for someone as attacking as Trent, I do want him to play the full game so that he can sort of fully stretch his attacking talent, get the goals and assists that we really want to have. And Liverpool have been looking really good as a defense as well. Konsa still has a great run of games, not too concerned about him losing the clean sheet. He's still, of course, a very consistent aerial threat. We've seen Onana score from 2 set pieces so far. So it just shows Aston Villa have some value from set pieces. I'm pretty confident in Konsa being a good pick, but he did pick up a knock in the international break. So we'll follow what happens when Emery speaks up on Konsa and his availability for Game Week 4. Otherwise, it might actually seep into my benching decisions. With Rodgers, with Bruno, blanks there, but ultimately I'm still pretty confident in these picks for the next week. Got Everton at home for Rodgers, and we have Southampton away for Bruno. Both 2 great games. Unfortunately, I'm not in the position where I have 2 free transfers, right? So some people have 2 free transfers. They can make moves away from Bruno in conjunction with Saka into players like Salah if you have a similar sort of team structure to mine, or you would have already moved out Bruno into maybe potentially a Liverpool midfielder. I'm still not that fussed about keeping Bruno in my team. I think that this fixture is still very valuable in terms of holding Bruno for this. And then we'll reconsider what we want to do with Bruno next week if he continues to disappoint. And also, of course, we can consider an early wildcard in conjunction with that. As far as Eze, Isak, João Pedro, these are assets that I think are just really, really strong. Absolutely nothing wrong with them. They have penalties, not necessarily set pieces when it comes to Isak or let's say João Pedro, but definitely really good minutes, really good positions, and generally speaking, nothing to really be concerned of considering that these are all 90-minute players for now. And at least that's what we've seen. João Pedro, of course, a little bit of risk with sort of returning from the international break, but from Fabian's comments on the press conferences, not too concerned really about João Pedro's availability for Game Week 4. So I feel like he is ready to start, and we'll just monitor that situation. I don't have the strongest of depth this week with the Konsa potential knock, but neither do most teams. And I think a lot of managers have already made a move towards João Pedro. So owning him outright has felt good. Obviously, I was very, very lucky to get a haul versus Arsenal, but that's sometimes the way things go in FPL, right? You can argue that Arsenal were pretty fortunate to keep 2 clean sheets in Game Weeks 1 and 2, and very unfortunate to be down to 10 men in game week 3, but that's how things go. That's the swings in FPL. So in terms of game week 4, let's look ahead towards my defense, because I think the first thing to look at maybe is just the clean sheet odds for this week. We have some data here presented by Rob T looking at the clean sheet odds. Ultimately, it's a fantastic week for Brighton. It's a fantastic week for Aston Villa. It's also a fantastic week, as it always is, really, for teams like City and Liverpool. Arsenal, obviously, small context, they are involved in a North London derby without Odegaard and Rice, so that's pretty poor for them. But otherwise, I've got really strong defenders potentially in my team. So I've got Dunk, Lewis. I also have Trent and Konsa. Now, what I would like to say about this situation is, for me, if anyone has Konsa in their team, I would just play Konsa, because he's more than likely a 90-minute player or a 0-minute player. I doubt that there's going to be a situation where he starts the game, he's rushed into the game, and suddenly he has to be taken off early. I feel like that's very unlikely. I think Aston Villa will make a decision depending on whether he's fit or not. Lee Carsley has also mentioned that arguably he was fine after he was taken off. I think it was a bit of a precautionary international break sub. So I have to sort of take Lee by his word there and assume that Konsa is fine. And as I said, if you're a manager dealing with this decision, I would still start Konsa because the fixture is that good from a clean sheet odds perspective. And I would only put Konsa at the back of my bench if we found out that he wasn't ready to play, but it doesn't really have a significant impact anyways. As far as Lewis, though, once again, with better clean sheet odds, with Lewis being a much more attacking player, the conundrum for me as a manager is whether or not I actually think that Lewis will start. Lewis played 90 minutes playing effectively as a left back for England in their last game in the international break. So he hasn't necessarily gotten the rest that someone like Walker has. But you can also argue that on the flip side, he's been incredibly match fit and he's played really well so far. Would it be a bit of a reach to say that he could be dropped for Brentford? I don't think so, but I also think that with his performances, as I said, being so good, I think it's very likely that he can play again. And one of his competitors in terms of how City could maybe alternate the formation around, let's say, having someone involved in the midfield to sort of support whilst also operating from a defensive position, is someone like John Stones, that ultimately will be coming from center back. Maybe you have Walker back in the team, and then you have this box structure as opposed to this diamond structure. And so with Stones maybe coming in, you can make the same argument that Stones was also involved within sort of international duties. I doubt that Rico would have to be benched for this fixture necessarily. So I do lean towards the idea that Rico is going to start, but we do have leaks in FPL. That's a reality. I will be sitting on the deadline 100% ready to sort of swap around someone like Rico and Konsa and maybe even Porro if it really comes to that, based on whatever news we get from Unai Emery on Konsa. So that's sort of my conundrum right now. I think that I'm definitely going to be playing Rico Lewis for this game week. So for game week 4, I'll be playing Henderson versus Leicester at home, Dunk versus Ipswich at home, Trent versus Nottingham Forest at home, and then hopefully what should be a starting Lewis versus Brentford at home. Now, you might disagree with me. You might have Lewis in your team and you think that he's benched. That's fine. I think one of the tricky things, of course, is if Lewis is benched, given that he's quite a flexible player, someone who can kind of play in the midfield right now, as opposed to just purely playing a defensive position, I don't think that Lewis is necessarily a 0 or 90-minute player. It's very possible that he could be a substitute for someone like a Kovacic if he plays, or arguably, they could even have a tactical sort of switch up in the game. If, let's say, Pep starts the game with Walker, it's not going so well, things go on, etc., etc. So those are my thoughts in terms of Lewis. I still think he starts, though. I'll take the punt there. In the midfield, I'll be going with Rodgers, Bruno Fernandes, Eze, and Saka. Now, a lot of people, as I mentioned, have the opportunity and the flexibility to go away from players like Bruno and Saka, and I think that's fine. If you have 2 free transfers, I can understand dropping Bruno down to someone else in the midfield and then actually upgrading Saka to Salah for the short term. Because let's be honest, game week 5 is a very, very scary game week to be without a Salah captaincy. And you might actually disagree with me here, but I would say it kind of yo-yos back to Saka for game week 6 and 7, where he becomes one of the prime candidate options for captaincy. But you can also argue that Salah is a good competing option in game week 6 captaincy if you choose to go to Salah. And at the same time, Haaland is an amazing captaincy option for game week 7. So if you are someone who's moving towards the Salah structure, I don't think you're necessarily going to be much worse off if you don't have Saka by game week 6. But that is something that I would like to have, right? The comfort of having usually on paper the best captaincy each week. And we've seen so far how impactful that can be, but also how many swings there are, right? When we had, let's say, Saka playing 10 versus 11, when Isak was playing 10 versus 11, that had a huge impact in terms of captaincy swings, and things like that can still happen in FPL. Haaland and Salah can still blank despite actually opening the season with incredible starts between the two of them. So what I would say, as I said, is if I had 2 free transfers, I would definitely have already moved off of Saka and Bruno. That's probably where I would have been, and I would have locked into a Game Week 6 wildcard. But I'm in the position where I've used 2 free transfers already. I only have 1 free transfer. Do I think going out of Saka for a -4 is really worth it from my perspective? Not necessarily, because I think based on the expected points projections, I'm not going to get that much value out of it. And I can still, if I roll the transfer this week, make the 2 free transfer move towards someone like Salah in that week instead. And then I can actually maximize my team in a different way. So those are my thoughts. As far as, let's say, vice captaincy for this week, I think it's very clearly going to be put on Eze. It's probably between him and maybe someone like Bruno in my team, but I have a lot more faith in someone like Eze. He's at home, he's versus Leicester. He's also got really all the tools that Bruno potentially could have. And I'd say he's arguably more offensive as well than Bruno. So that's why we're going to go with Eze here with the better fixture. And ultimately, my faith in someone like Rodgers hasn't really wavered too much, because I think my concern, of course, is always going to be whether he has the minutes. And I would compare him to maybe even someone like Sobo within Liverpool, where ultimately, if you are playing for a reasonably strong enough team, you're at a specific price point where I think you're really good value for money. You play all the minutes that we potentially could want, and you have good fixtures, you're probably going to provide some value. His underlying stats so far have already been a slightly bit better than last season's, and I think honestly, coming at the price point of 5.0 or 5.1, it is really hard to go wrong with the Rodgers pick. So I really am not that concerned. A lot of people talked about Onana. It's 2 set-piece goals. I'm not going to overreact to that. I don't think we've ever looked at any player who purely scores from set pieces, like someone like, let's say, Souček, and can say he can absolutely maintain that run of pace for a long time. Now, interestingly with Souček, I've used that example of him in the past, but this season he's actually been playing extremely offensively. So if the average position of someone like Amadou Onana was actually really, really offensive, he was taking a lot of shots, in open play, etc., etc., I would be a lot more interested in him. But for now, I'm not, because most of his chances, and the big chances, have come from a very small sample size and from 2 game weeks where he got 2 great set-piece chances. So unfortunately, I'm not really going to buy into the Onana hype. I'm sure a lot of people are upset with that, but that's it. As far as the front line here, I'm going to go with Isak, João Pedro, and Haaland. It's very, very clearly a Haaland captaincy for myself. João Pedro and Isak are also very simple plays this week. Both of them have great fixtures. A lot of people have actually been transferring something like Saka to Salah and Isak out to João Pedro. And I feel like if you had the opportunity to do that, I would still do that move. It's a very strong move. But obviously in my case, there's less of a need to move out of someone like Isak right now, because the next 2 fixtures are still really, really good for Newcastle. Despite what we said about Newcastle offense looking a little bit off, the reality is Isak still provides a lot of value. And I think you have to look at someone like Eze for between game weeks 1 and 2 as a good comparison of that, where a lot of people are just talking about how worse the attack has been. And I feel like even within a very limited attacking team, someone who actually can provide so much value within FPL is still going to be a good pick. There's no need to sort of completely move off of a player like that. So Isak stays. João Pedro is just a really great pick. Hopefully he gets to play more minutes, even though I know he's only had a few days to train by the time we actually reach the deadline. So that's probably going to be Friday training for him and Saturday training. And that's it, right? So that's one of the tricky things, I suppose, with this fixture. And sorry, not even Saturday training, but actually maybe some sort of warm up, I suppose, for Saturday. And then, of course, they're playing Ipswich at 3 p.m., I believe. So Fabian's already mentioned that he can still be fit and he can be recovered for the game. I think that that's very likely going to be the case. So I'm going to take João Pedro here very easily, and I don't have any regrets about sort of having him for this game week. As far as captaincy, it's very clearly Haaland. As I've mentioned, I don't think there's much debate here, but as I said in the preview video, which you can have a look at yourself, it's very close between Haaland and Salah this week. As far as free transfers that I can make as an emergency for this week, I feel like there is a potential situation for myself where if Robertson is someone who I want to go for, I feel like there's an emergency situation for my team where if Konsa is confirmed out, if Lewis is confirmed not to start, I am actually very comfortable making a free transfer from Lewis to Robertson this game week in game week 4. The reason why is because Liverpool just have simply looked amazing on defense. Robertson still takes set pieces. He's still in offensive spots. Wasn't very offensive within the Man United game, but I think clearly it's going to be quite tactical the sort of adjustments there between him and his average attacking positions in open play compared to someone like Trent, who also sort of produces a lot from deep anyways. So my thoughts are I could go Lewis to Robertson if I'm really, really certain that Lewis is going to be benched, and that's with a leak on the deadline. So that's the potential for me to make a move on Game Week 4. But right now, I'm not planning to make a move. In the future, though, Game Week 5 is the very interesting week, because I feel like talking about very quickly my Game Week 5 transfers has a huge impact on, once again, what my wildcard is going to be and why I'm making certain moves. The most logical move, I would say, is to go out of Saka and to go out of Haaland if I'm planning a wildcard 6. The reason being because simply I'm avoiding Saka versus City and I'm avoiding Haaland versus Arsenal, and then I can reconsider whether I want to go back into these assets. Although, of course, I recognize that I'm 0.1 tied up into Haaland right now, and also technically, half of that tied up into Saka, who's already risen in price once within the game. What I do find interesting, though, is if I go for a wildcard 7 strategy, or maybe delay the approach, the alternative move that I could actually make is something like Winks to Salah and Haaland to Havertz, and then maybe I can wildcard 7. Because what I would say about Haaland is his fixture on Game Week 6 isn't exactly the greatest. It's Newcastle, but it's away from home. So arguably before the great run of games, which starts from Fulham at home on Game Week 7, I could generally consider maybe delaying the wildcard strategy 1 week, going for Havertz through Haaland, and having Havertz there for Game Week 6 would make a lot of sense. And I would keep Saka for Game Week 6 as well to have the best captaincy there. But also, instead of basically having a Haaland plus Saka structure, I would effectively have moved into a 2 Arsenal structure with Saka plus Salah in the team. And therefore, I capture the best Game Week 5 captaincy with Salah. And then on Game Week 6, I can reconsider whether I want to captain between Saka and Salah there. And I think my team looks very, very strong if things go well. On top of that, one of the benefits of maybe seeing out a wildcard 7 is, once again, this sort of confidence in Liverpool. So I kind of like the idea that I can continue to watch this Liverpool team play and maybe even hold on to my assets, because I suppose there's a weird watch where if Game Week 5 looks really good, if I really like the team structure that I have, if Bruno is someone who actually finally delivers in Game Week 4, I suppose I could also delay the wildcard altogether, and then I could once again find different moves to play around over the next 2 game weeks, over getting Salah within the team, and then reconsidering what I want to do with someone like Haaland, and probably it's going to be bringing him back in Game Week 7. But that's why I've mentioned wildcard 7 is a very interesting strategy, because wildcard 6 seems like a very conventional strategy as well, but then I feel like I don't get the benefit of the additional role that I think is guaranteed for me if I was to wildcard on 7, because I would definitely roll on Game Week 6. In a wildcard 6 strategy, I think one of the issues is that I would be wildcarding without, an additional free transfer in the bank, and I would find myself in another situation where I have to make basically a perfect team without issues. So issues like Kwanzaa and Nkunku in Game Week 1. So those are kind of my thoughts right now in terms of my transfer plans in the future. Let me know what your thoughts are in terms of wildcard 6 and 7. Have you been considering wildcard 7? One thing that I've actually had mentioned to me was that wildcard 7 doesn't feel really nice because unfortunately it's right before another international break. So it's very plausible that actually, I make a great team, I wildcard on 7, and then I've got issues again, which is why I kind of like the idea that I'm going to roll a free transfer anyways on Game Week 6, which will allow me to have 2 free transfers coming out of the wildcard, which I think is going to be a little bit of protection against a potential international break calamity. So those are my thoughts right now. Take care and goodbye. I'll see you guys on the deadline stream as well. If you guys are going to be around, I'll probably be streaming a little bit earlier this time at 9 a.m. So have a look at that. And if you're not subscribed already, please feel free to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care and goodbye.